My cousin punished and blamed my son for everything that her son destroyed. So, I destroyed her reputation. My cousin Rachel constantly blamed my 6-year-old son Tommy for everything her 8-year-old son Aiden did wrong at every family gathering because she couldn't accept that her perfect angel was actually a destructive brat. When Aiden broke his grandmother's antique vase while throwing a ball in the house, Rachel immediately said Tommy must have thrown it first, even though Tommy was outside with me when it happened. When Aiden ate all the desserts before dinner and got sick, Rachel told everyone Tommy had dared him to do it even though Tommy was allergic to chocolate and couldn't eat any of those desserts. When Aiden drew on Uncle's new car with permanent marker, Rachel said Tommy gave him the marker and told him cars were coloring books, even though Tommy couldn't reach the drawer where the markers were kept. At every family event, something expensive got broken, someone's feelings got hurt, or something went missing, and Rachel's immediate response was always that Tommy had started it, influenced it, or done it himself while Aiden was innocently nearby. She'd grab Tommy by the shoulders and demand he apologize to Aiden for getting him in trouble even when Tommy had been in a completely different room. She told the family Tommy was a bad influence who was jealous of Aiden's good behavior and tried to frame him constantly. She actually convinced some relatives that 6-year-old Tommy was masterminding schemes to make 8-year-old Aiden look bad because he couldn't stand having a better-behaved cousin. When I showed Rachel proof that Tommy couldn't have done these things, she said I was covering for him and enabling his destructive behavior. She said good mothers made their children take responsibility instead of making excuses. She told everyone I was raising a future criminal while she was raising a future leader, who unfortunately got blamed for everything because he was too polite to defend himself. At Thanksgiving, Aiden destroyed grandmother's entire garden trying to catch a lizard, but Rachel announced Tommy had done it and made him stand in the corner during dinner as punishment. Tommy cried the entire meal while Aiden smirked and ate his food, occasionally whispering to Tommy that he'd blame him for something worse next time. When I tried to remove Tommy from the corner, Rachel said I was undermining family discipline and teaching my son he could escape consequences. The extended family started believing Rachel's narrative and began watching Tommy suspiciously, while treating Aiden like a victim of constant false accusations. That's when I decided Rachel needed to experience what it felt like to have her child falsely blamed for everything. I started documenting everything with hidden cameras at family gatherings, but instead of revealing them immediately, I waited and let evidence accumulate. I caught Aiden stealing money from purses, breaking decorations, lying about Tommy, and even putting bugs in food to cause chaos. But I kept quiet and started my plan to make Rachel understand consequences. First, I began mentioning to family members that items had gone missing from my house after Rachel visited, suggesting maybe Aiden had sticky fingers, but I wasn't sure. When Rachel heard this, she exploded, saying Tommy was obviously stealing and trying to frame Aiden. I agreed publicly that it must be Tommy, and made a big show of checking his pockets and room while finding nothing. But I'd already planted the seed that things disappeared around Aiden. The real justice came at Cousin Julia's wedding, where Rachel was maid of honor. I gave Aiden a special spy mission to play with the wedding cake decorations while everyone was outside for photos. Aiden eagerly destroyed the $3,000 cake, thinking it was a game, while I filmed everything from my phone. When everyone returned to find the destroyed cake, Rachel immediately screamed that Tommy had ruined the wedding. But Tommy had been in the photos with everyone else while Aiden had frosting all over his hands and face. Rachel still tried to claim Tommy had done it earlier, and Aiden was just checking the damage, but the videographer had footage of Aiden alone with the cake for 20 minutes. Julia was furious and demanded Rachel pay for the cake since her son had destroyed it. Rachel tried to say it was an accident, but I showed everyone the compilation of videos I'd taken over the past year of Aiden destroying things while Rachel blamed Tommy. The family watched in horror as Aiden broke items, hurt pets, stole money, and ruined events while Rachel consistently pointed at my crying son. They saw Aiden laughing about getting Tommy in trouble, and Rachel rewarding him for his lies with treats and privileges. The relatives who'd believed Rachel were mortified that they'd punished an innocent child for months. Grandmother was especially angry that she'd made Tommy write apology letters for things he'd never done while Aiden had been destroying her belongings without consequence. She demanded Rachel reimburse her for everything Aiden had broken over the years, which totaled thousands of dollars. 2 days after, she called and said she was suing me for defamation and emotional damage to Aiden. I stare at my phone where Rachel's text threatens a lawsuit for defamation and emotional damage to Aiden, and my hands start shaking with a mix of rage and fear. After everything she put Tommy through, after all the proof I showed everyone, she's actually trying to make herself the victim. The words blur on the screen as I read them again. She wants me to pay for what I did to her precious son. She says I planned the whole thing to hurt him on purpose. My chest feels tight and I can't breathe right. I grab my phone and call my sister before I can think about it. She was at the wedding. She saw everything. She'll tell me I'm not crazy for what I did. The phone rings 3 times and I'm pacing my living room, biting my thumbnail until it hurts. My sister answers and I can barely get the words out. I tell her about Rachel's text and the lawsuit threat. My voice cracks and I hate how weak I sound. My sister tells me to calm down and that she's coming over right now. She says not to respond to Rachel at all. Just wait until she gets there. I hang up and sit on my couch staring at the text message. Rachel's words keep running through my mind. Emotional damage, defamation. Like she didn't spend a year destroying my son's reputation and making him cry at every family gathering. My sister arrives within an hour and finds me pacing my kitchen while Tommy plays in his room, thankfully unaware of the new drama. She reads Rachel's text and her face goes red with anger. She says Rachel has absolutely no case and is just lashing out because she got caught. We spend 2 hours going through every video I took, every witness who saw Aiden destroy things, and every family member who now knows the truth about what really happened. My sister makes a list on a piece of paper. She writes down the vase and the desserts and the car and the garden. She writes down the names of people who saw Aiden break things. She writes down the videographer who caught Aiden alone with the cake. The list fills up the whole page. My sister taps the paper with her pen and says, "This is all proof that everything I showed was true." Truth isn't defamation. She says Rachel is just mad that everyone finally knows what Aiden really is. But I keep thinking about the money. Lawsuits cost money even if you win. My sister sees my face and asks what's wrong. I tell her I can't afford a lawyer. I barely have enough saved up for emergencies. She pulls out her phone and starts searching. She says her friend from work knows a good family lawyer. She texts her friend right there in my kitchen. 5 minutes later, she has a name and number. Wallace Mooney. She says I should call him tomorrow morning. I contact Wallace the next morning and send him everything before our meeting. The videos and documentation and witness statements from the wedding. My hands shake while I'm attaching the files to the email. There are so many videos. Aiden stealing from grandmother's purse. Aiden breaking the lamp at my house. Aiden putting a bug in the potato salad at the 4th of July party. I watch a few seconds of each one before I attach them. Aiden's face looks so happy when he's destroying things. So pleased with himself. I send the email and make an appointment for that afternoon. I can't eat lunch. My stomach feels like it's full of rocks. I keep checking my phone to see if Wallace responded. At 2 o'clock, I drive to his office downtown. The building is tall and made of glass. The elevator is so shiny I can see my reflection. I look tired and scared. Wallace's office is on the 7th floor. The waiting room has leather chairs and magazines about law. A secretary tells me to sit down. Wallace will be ready in a few minutes. I sit and stare at a painting on the wall. It's supposed to be peaceful, but it just makes me more nervous. Wallace comes out and shakes my hand. He's older than I expected with gray hair and glasses. He leads me into his office and closes the door. He's already made notes on a yellow legal pad. Pages of notes. He sits behind his desk and tells me he watched all the videos. He seems confident this lawsuit threat is mostly bluster meant to intimidate me into backing down. Wallace explains that truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and I have extensive video evidence proving everything I revealed was factual. He points to his notes and walks me through the legal stuff. Defamation means lying about someone to hurt their reputation. But I didn't lie. I showed videos of what actually happened. He taps his pen on the desk and says that's the key point. Everything I revealed was true. He warns me that Rachel could still file the lawsuit and drag me through expensive legal proceedings even if she can't win. Some people file lawsuits just to make the other person suffer, just to make them spend money on lawyers and waste time in court. The consultation costs $300. He tells me this up front. If Rachel actually files the lawsuit, defending against it could run $5,000 to $10,000 depending on how far she pushes it. My stomach drops when he says $10,000. I don't have $10,000. I barely have $3,000 in savings. Wallace sees my face and says most of the time these threats don't turn into actual lawsuits. People get mad and threaten to sue, but then they calm down. He says we should wait and see if Rachel actually files papers. If she does, we'll deal with it then. He gives me his card and tells me to call him if anything changes. I write him a check for $300 and my hand shakes while I sign it. I leave his office feeling slightly better, but still worried about the financial burden of a legal fight. The elevator ride down feels longer than the ride up. I sit in my car in the parking garage for 10 minutes before I start driving. My phone buzzes with a text from my sister asking how it went. I tell her Wallace said I have a good case, but it might cost a lot of money. She texts back that she can lend me some money if I need it. I start crying in my car. Not because of Rachel or the lawsuit. Because my sister would give me money she probably doesn't have to help me. I drive home and Tommy is watching cartoons on the couch. He looks so small sitting there with his favorite blanket. That evening, I sit Tommy down and gently ask how he's been feeling since the wedding, since everyone finally knows he didn't do those bad things. He's quiet for a long moment. He picks at a loose thread on his blanket. Then he says he's happy people believe him now, but he's still scared of Aiden and doesn't want to see him at family events anymore. His voice is so soft I almost can't hear him. He won't look at me when he says it. He stares at his hands instead. I ask him why he's scared, and he says Aiden might find a way to blame him for stuff again, even though everyone knows the truth now. He says Aiden is bigger and meaner and he doesn't want to be near him. Tommy's admission that he's scared breaks my heart because I realize the damage from Rachel's accusations runs deeper than I thought. This isn't something that gets fixed just because the family knows the truth now. Tommy spent months being blamed and punished for things he didn't do. Months of adults not believing him. Months of crying and being scared. That doesn't just go away. I hug him and tell him he doesn't have to see Aiden if he doesn't want to. I promise him that. He hugs me back and asks if we can skip the next family party. I say yes. We can skip as many as he needs to. After Tommy goes to bed, I search online for child therapists. I need someone who can help him work through all of this. Someone who specializes in helping kids process unfair treatment and rebuild their confidence. I find a woman named Mildred Sterling who has good reviews. Her website says she works with kids who've been bullied or blamed unfairly. That's exactly what Tommy needs. I call her office the next morning and leave a message. The receptionist calls me back an hour later. The first available appointment is 2 weeks away. 2 whole weeks. That feels like forever when I see Tommy flinch every time I mention family gatherings. But I take the appointment anyway. It's better than nothing. 3 days after Rachel's lawsuit threat, my phone explodes with messages from various family members taking different sides. I wake up to 15 text messages. Some relatives fully support what I did and think Rachel got exactly what she deserved for abusing Tommy. My cousin Sarah sends a long message saying she always suspected something was wrong with how Rachel blamed Tommy for everything. She says she's sorry she didn't speak up sooner. My Uncle Mark texts that he's proud of me for protecting my son, but other messages aren't so nice. Some relatives think I went too far by setting up Aiden at the wedding and using a child as part of my revenge plan. They say 2 wrongs don't make a right. My Aunt Linda sends a message saying I should have talked to the adults instead of tricking a little boy. She says what I did was cruel no matter what Rachel did first. The messages keep coming all morning, supportive ones mixed with angry ones. My phone won't stop buzzing. I turn off the sound and put it face down on the table, but I can still see the screen light up with each new message. The family is splitting into camps. People who think I was right and people who think I went too far. I don't know which is worse. Being blamed by Rachel or being judged by half the family. Uncle James sends a long text saying he understands why I did it but wishes I'd come to the adults first instead of orchestrating the cake incident. He says he would have helped me if I'd asked. He says the family could have confronted Rachel together without involving the kids. I read his message 3 times. Part of me knows he's right. But another part of me remembers all the times I tried to tell adults what was happening and nobody believed me. Aunt Beverly says she's disgusted that I would manipulate an 8-year-old child regardless of what Rachel did. She says Aiden is traumatized from being publicly embarrassed. She says I'm no better than Rachel for using a kid to get revenge. That message makes me feel sick. The family is splitting into camps and I realize my actions didn't just expose Rachel, but broke relationships that might never heal. My phone keeps buzzing with more messages. Some people defending me, some people attacking me, some people trying to stay neutral. I stop reading them after a while. It's too much. I just wanted to protect Tommy and make people see the truth. But now everything is a mess and I don't know how to fix it. Grandmother calls me directly and her voice is tired in a way I've never heard before. She doesn't sound angry, just sad and worn out. She says she's glad the truth came out but heartbroken about how it happened. She's worried about both Tommy and Aiden now. Both boys are hurting because of what their mothers did. She tells me she did demand Rachel pay her back for the damaged items. The vase and the garden decorations and the other things Aiden broke over the years. It adds up to a few $1,000s. But Rachel is claiming she can't afford it because she needs money for Aiden's therapy after the wedding incident. Grandmother's voice cracks when she says this. She says Rachel told her that Aiden has been having nightmares and won't go to the school some days. He's scared of what the other kids will say if they find out what happened. Rachel is taking him to a therapist twice a week. Grandmother asks me if that's true or if Rachel is making excuses again. I tell her I don't know. I haven't talked to Rachel since the wedding. Grandmother sighs and says this whole situation is a disaster. She says she loves both me and Rachel, but we've made everything so complicated. She asks me to think about the boys and what's best for them going forward. Then she hangs up. I feel a sharp stab of guilt when Grandmother mentions Aiden needing therapy because of what happened at the wedding. I knew setting him up would embarrass him publicly, but I convinced myself he deserved consequences for his behavior. He spent a year making Tommy's life miserable. He laughed about getting Tommy in trouble. He whispered threats to Tommy during Thanksgiving dinner. He was cruel and mean, and nobody stopped him. So I thought public embarrassment was fair. An eye for an eye. But now I'm facing the reality that I used an 8-year-old child as a weapon against his mother. I gave him that spy mission knowing he'd destroy the cake. Knowing everyone would see. Knowing he'd be humiliated in front of 50 wedding guests. That's left him with his own psychological damage to deal with. He's having nightmares now. He's scared to go to the school. He needs therapy twice a week. I sit on my couch and put my head in my hands. What have I done? I wanted to protect Tommy, but I hurt another kid in the process. A kid who was acting out because his mother never taught him right from wrong. A kid who needed help, not public shaming. The guilt sits heavy in my chest and I can't make it go away. I spend the next 2 days jumping every time my phone buzzes, expecting another message from Rachel or her lawyer. Tommy notices my nervousness and asks if everything is okay, and I force a smile and tell him everything is fine. But everything is not fine. I can't stop thinking about what grandmother said, about Aiden having nightmares and needing therapy twice a week. I tell myself he deserved consequences for his behavior, but the guilt keeps creeping back in during quiet moments. On Thursday morning, a thick envelope arrives by certified mail from Sterling Legal Associates. My hands shake as I sign for it and carry it inside. The return address confirms it's from Rachel's lawyer. I set it on the kitchen counter and stare at it for 10 minutes before I can make myself open it. The demand letter inside is 3 pages long on official letterhead. It's addressed to me formally and uses legal language that makes my stomach hurt. The lawyer, whose name is printed at the bottom as Chloe Sterling, demands that I issue a public apology to Rachel and Aiden within 10 days. The letter says I deliberately traumatized a minor child through public humiliation and destroyed his reputation within the family. It claims Aiden needs extensive therapy to recover from what I did at the wedding, and Rachel has already spent thousands of dollars on counseling sessions. The letter demands $15,000 to cover current and future therapy costs for Aiden. If I don't comply within 10 days, they'll file a lawsuit for defamation and emotional damage. I read the letter 3 times, and each time the words make me feel sicker. I grab my phone and call Wallace. His secretary puts me through right away, and I read him the entire letter while my voice shakes. Wallace listens quietly, then asks me to scan and email it to him so he can review the exact wording. I do that immediately, and he calls me back 20 minutes later. He tells me it's a standard intimidation tactic that lawyers use to scare people into settling without going to court. He says the demands are excessive and probably not enforceable, but we need to respond carefully. Wallace explains that there is a kernel of legitimate concern about how I involved Aiden in my plan. Setting up a child to be publicly humiliated, even if that child had been cruel to Tommy, creates some gray area that Rachel's lawyer is trying to exploit. He says we have a strong defense because everything I revealed was true and documented, but the method I used to reveal it could be questioned. Wallace tells me not to panic and says he'll draft a response. The call costs me another $150 in legal fees, and I feel the money slipping away with each conversation. That night, I can't sleep. I lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the wedding over and over in my mind. I see Aiden's face when everyone realized he'd destroyed the cake, the way he looked confused and then scared as the adults surrounded him. I remember how Rachel grabbed his arm and her face went white when she understood that this time there was proof. This time she couldn't blame Tommy. I wanted Rachel to feel what Tommy had felt for months, that sick fear of being accused and not believed. I wanted her to experience the humiliation of having her child exposed in front of the whole family. And I got exactly what I wanted. But I also set up an 8-year-old kid to fail in front of 50 wedding guests. I gave him that spy mission knowing he'd destroy the cake because that's what Aiden does. He destroys things. And I used that against him. Yes, he'd been cruel to Tommy. Yes, he'd laughed about getting Tommy in trouble. Yes, he'd whispered threats during Thanksgiving dinner, but he's 8 years old and his mother never taught him right from wrong. She enabled his worst behavior and rewarded his lies. So whose fault is it really that Aiden acts the way he does? I squeeze my eyes shut and try to push away the guilt, but it won't leave. The fact that Aiden was mean to Tommy doesn't erase what I did. I used a child as a weapon against his mother. I manipulated him into a situation where he'd be publicly shamed, where dozens of people would see him at his worst, where his own mother would have to face what he'd done with no way to deny it. And now he's having nightmares. Now he's scared to go to the school. Now he needs therapy twice a week. I roll over and pull the blanket up to my chin. Tomorrow is Tommy's first appointment with Mildred, the child psychologist Wallace recommended. At least I'm trying to help Tommy heal from what Rachel did to him. But who's helping Aiden heal from what I did to him? Tommy's appointment with Mildred is at 10 in the morning on Friday. The office is in a cheerful building with bright yellow walls and children's artwork hanging in the waiting room. Tommy clutches my hand as we walk in, and I can feel how tense he is. A receptionist checks us in and gives Tommy a coloring sheet and crayons while we wait. 5 minutes later, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a ponytail comes out to greet us. She introduces herself as Mildred and shakes Tommy's hand like he's an adult, which makes him stand up straighter. She invites Tommy back to her office and asks if he wants me to come with him, or if he'd like to talk to her alone first. Tommy looks at me with wide eyes, and I squeeze his shoulder and tell him, I'll be right here in the waiting room if he needs me. He takes a deep breath and follows Mildred down the hall. I sit in the waiting room for 45 minutes, flipping through parenting magazines without reading a single word. My mind keeps drifting back to the demand letter and the $15,000 Rachel wants. I think about Aiden in therapy too, probably in an office similar to this one, talking about what happened at the wedding. Finally, Mildred brings Tommy back out, and he's smiling in a way I haven't seen in weeks. She tells me Tommy did great and asks if I can stay for a few minutes to talk privately. Tommy goes back to coloring in the waiting room while Mildred takes me into her office. She closes the door and gestures for me to sit in one of the comfortable chairs across from her desk. Mildred explains that Tommy shows signs of anxiety and something she calls hypervigilance, which means he's always watching and waiting for something bad to happen. She says this is common in children who've been repeatedly blamed for things they didn't do. Tommy doesn't trust that adults will believe him or protect him, so he's constantly on alert trying to prevent problems before they start. Mildred recommends weekly sessions for at least 3 months, possibly longer depending on how Tommy progresses. She'll use play therapy and art activities to help him process his feelings and rebuild his confidence. She also suggests I read some parenting books about helping anxious children, and she gives me a list of titles. As we discuss the treatment plan, I ask about insurance coverage. Mildred checks my policy and tells me they'll cover 60% of each session, which means I'll pay $80 out of pocket per week. For 3 months, that's almost $1,000, and possibly more if Tommy needs additional sessions beyond that. I drive home with Tommy chattering about the toys in Mildred's office and how she let him build with blocks while they talked. He seems lighter somehow, like having someone listen to him and believe him has already started helping. But my mind is doing math that makes my chest tight. Tommy's therapy will cost around $1,000 for 3 months. Wallace's legal fees are already over $500 and will climb higher if Rachel actually files the lawsuit. If this goes to court, Wallace estimated $5,000 to $10,000 in legal costs. And now Rachel is demanding $15,000 for Aiden's therapy. No matter which way this goes, I'm looking at thousands of dollars in expenses. I think about my savings account and how much is in there. I think about my monthly budget and where I could cut costs. I think about picking up extra shifts at work if my boss will let me. The financial pressure sits on top of the emotional guilt, and I feel like I'm drowning. That evening after Tommy goes to bed, I email Wallace and ask him to draft a response to the demand letter. I tell him I want to stand firm and not give in to Rachel's threats, but I'm scared about the possibility of actually going to court. Wallace replies within an hour saying he'll have a draft ready by Monday. His email says we'll firmly deny any defamation because I have extensive evidence proving everything I revealed was true. He'll point out that truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. He'll also offer to negotiate a mutual agreement where both sides drop all claims and go our separate ways. Wallace thinks that's the most realistic outcome because Rachel probably can't afford to actually follow through with expensive litigation. His email is reassuring, but also reminds me that every email, every call, every document he drafts costs me money. I close my laptop and sit in the dark living room, listening to the house settle around me. My phone rings on Saturday afternoon and Julia's name appears on the screen. I answer and hear her crying before she even says hello. She's sobbing so hard I can barely understand her at first. I ask her what's wrong, and she takes a shaky breath and says her mother is pressuring her to take sides in the family conflict. Julia's mother wants her to publicly support Rachel and condemn what I did at the wedding, but Julia doesn't know what to do because she's grateful I exposed what really happened to her cake, but she's also upset that her wedding became the stage for family drama. She asks me through her tears if I couldn't have found another way to reveal the truth. She says her wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and now when people talk about it, they mention the destroyed cake and the family fight. Her mother-in-law keeps bringing up the incident and making comments about Julia's family being dysfunctional. It's caused tension in her new marriage, and Julia's husband is annoyed that his wife's family drama is affecting their relationship. Julia sobs that she understands why I did what I did, but she wishes it hadn't happened at her wedding. She wishes I'd picked literally any other time or place to expose Rachel and Aiden. I listen to her cry and feel another wave of guilt crash over me. Julia is right. Her special day got hijacked by my revenge plan. I used her wedding as the perfect stage because I knew everyone would be there. I knew Rachel would be maid of honor and couldn't leave. I knew the destroyed cake would be impossible to ignore or excuse. I picked Julia's wedding deliberately because it would cause maximum impact, and I didn't think about what that would do to Julia herself. I tell Julia I'm sorry, and I mean it completely. I apologize for using her wedding as the setting for my plan. I tell her she's absolutely right that I should have found another way, another time, another place. Julia sniffles and says she accepts my apology, but the damage is already done. Her mother-in-law won't stop talking about it. Every time they visit her husband's parents, someone mentions the cake incident. Julia's husband told her last night that his mother thinks Julia comes from a trashy family that can't behave appropriately at formal events. Julia is humiliated every time it comes up. She says her wedding memories are now mixed with memories of the fight and the accusations and watching her expensive cake in ruins on the floor. I ask Julia what I can do to make it better, knowing there's probably nothing that will actually fix this. She's quiet for a moment, then says her 1-month anniversary is coming up, and she was planning a small party for close friends. If I paid for a replacement cake for that party, something really beautiful and special, it might help her create a better memory. It won't erase what happened at the wedding, but it would show that I understand how my actions affected her. I immediately agree and ask what kind of cake she wants. Julia describes a 3-tier design with flowers and her husband's initials. She sends me a picture from a bakery website and I see the price is $400. I don't hesitate. I tell Julia I'll order it and have it delivered to her anniversary party. She thanks me and her voice softens a bit. She says she does understand why I did what I did, even if she wishes it hadn't happened at her wedding. She knows Tommy was suffering and I was trying to protect him. She just wishes I'd considered the consequences for everyone else who'd be caught in the middle. On Tuesday, Wallace calls to tell me Rachel responded to his offer. Instead of accepting the mutual agreement to drop all claims, Rachel's lawyer sent an even more aggressive letter. Now they're demanding $25,000 and threatening to file the lawsuit within a week if I don't pay. Wallace sounds almost amused when he tells me this. He says Rachel is overplaying her hand, which actually means she probably can't afford to follow through with litigation. If she had the money and confidence to take this to court, she'd be more measured in her demands. The escalation from $15,000 to $25,000 in just a few days suggests desperation, not strength. Wallace advises me to stand firm and not give in to the escalating demands. He's confident that if we call her bluff, Rachel will eventually back down because she can't sustain an expensive legal battle. But I'm scared. What if Wallace is wrong? What if Rachel does file the lawsuit? What if I end up in court having to defend my actions in front of a judge? What if I lose and have to pay even more than $25,000? Wallace senses my fear through the phone and his voice becomes gentler. He reminds me that I have extensive video evidence proving everything I revealed was true. He reminds me that truth is an absolute defense against defamation. He reminds me that Rachel's lawyer is using intimidation tactics that rarely work on people who stand their ground. I take a deep breath and tell Wallace to proceed with standing firm. He says he'll send a response reiterating our position and making it clear we won't be bullied into paying money I don't owe. After we hang up, I sit at my kitchen table with my head in my hands, wondering how much longer this is going to drag on. Tommy wakes me up at 2 a.m. on Wednesday, crying and calling for me. I jump out of bed and run to his room, finding him sitting up with tears streaming down his face. He's shaking and gasping for breath, and I immediately pull him into my arms. He sobs against my shoulder and tells me he had a nightmare about Aiden. In the dream, Aiden was blaming him for breaking something at the school, and all the teachers believed Aiden instead of Tommy. No matter how much Tommy tried to explain that he didn't do it, nobody would listen. Aiden kept laughing and saying he'd get Tommy in trouble for something even worse next time. Tommy cries that he's scared Aiden will find a way to get him in trouble again, even though everyone knows the truth now. He's scared that somehow Aiden will trick people into believing his lies again. I hold Tommy tight and rock him back and forth, telling him over and over that Aiden can't hurt him anymore. I promise him that the family knows the truth now, and nobody will believe Aiden's lies. But even as I say the words, I can hear how hollow they sound. Tommy doesn't feel safe. The months of false accusations left scars that won't heal just because the truth came out. He's living in fear, and no amount of vindication against Rachel is worth my son feeling this way. I need to find a way to end this conflict for Tommy's sake, not for my own need to be right or to punish Rachel. Tommy finally falls back asleep around 3:30, and I carry him to my bed so he won't be alone if he has another nightmare. I lie awake next to him watching his face, seeing the tension even in sleep, and I make a decision. The next morning, I call my Aunt Beverly, who's managed to stay neutral during the whole family conflict. I ask if she'd be willing to mediate a conversation between Rachel and me. Aunt Beverly is quiet for a long moment, then says she's not sure that's a good idea because we're both too angry to have a productive discussion. I tell her about Tommy's nightmare and how scared he still is. I tell her I need to find a way to end this for my son's sake, and I can't do that through lawyers sending threatening letters back and forth. Aunt Beverly sighs and says she'll think about it. She calls me back 2 hours later and says she'll try if both Rachel and I can commit to focusing on the kids' well-being rather than our own grievances. I agree immediately, promising I'll do whatever it takes to make this conversation work. Aunt Beverly says she'll contact Rachel to see if she's willing to meet. I spend the rest of the day anxiously checking my phone, waiting to hear back. That evening, Aunt Beverly texts me that Rachel refused. Rachel told her she has nothing to discuss with someone who deliberately traumatized her son. Aunt Beverly says she'll keep trying, but she's not optimistic. I feel my hope deflating. Of course Rachel refused. Why would she want to talk to me after what I did? But Aunt Beverly doesn't give up. Over the next 3 days, she calls Rachel multiple times, gently persistent in a way only she can be. She talks to Rachel about both boys needing closure. She talks about how the legal battle is hurting everyone. She talks about family and healing and moving forward. On Saturday morning, Aunt Beverly calls to tell me Rachel finally agreed to one mediated conversation with strict ground rules about staying civil and focused on moving forward. We schedule it for the following Saturday at Aunt Beverly's house. I have 1 week to prepare for the hardest conversation of my life. I arrive at Aunt Beverly's house 20 minutes early, my stomach twisted tight with nerves about facing Rachel after everything that happened. Beverly opens the door and gives me a long hug before leading me to her living room, where she set up 2 chairs facing each other with a small table between them. She tells me to sit on the side closest to the kitchen and asks if I want water or tea, but I shake my head because I don't think I could swallow anything right now. Rachel arrives exactly on time, looking as tense as I feel, her face pale and her hands gripping her purse strap so hard her knuckles are white. Beverly greets her warmly and gestures to the other chair, and Rachel sits down without looking at me, her eyes fixed on the coffee table between us. Beverly settles into a 3rd chair positioned slightly to the side so she can see both of us, and she starts by thanking us for being willing to have this conversation. She explains that we'll each get time to speak without interruption, and that the goal is to find common ground rather than rehash who was right or wrong. Rachel goes first because Beverly thinks letting her express her anger might help her be more open to listening later. Rachel's voice shakes when she starts talking about the wedding, describing how mortified she felt when everyone saw the destroyed cake and realized Aiden had done it. She says the worst part was watching the family's faces change from sympathy to disgust, as they understood she'd been lying about Tommy for months. She talks about driving home with Aiden crying in the back seat, asking why everyone was mad at him when he was just playing a game like I told him to. Rachel's hands twist in her lap as she describes the past week of Aiden having nightmares, waking up screaming that everyone hates him and thinks he's bad. She says he refuses to go to the school because he's scared the other kids will find out what happened, and he started wetting the bed again even though he stopped doing that 2 years ago. Her voice breaks when she tells us that Aiden asked her yesterday if she still loves him or if she thinks he's a bad kid too. Beverly nods sympathetically and asks Rachel to talk about what she needs from this conversation, and Rachel says she needs me to understand that Aiden is suffering real damage from what I did at the wedding. Hearing Rachel describe Aiden's nightmares and bedwetting makes guilt crash over me in waves because Tommy's been having almost identical problems since the months of false accusations started. Beverly turns to me and says it's my turn to share, and I take a shaky breath before starting to talk about watching Tommy get blamed over and over for things he didn't do. I describe how his bright, confident personality slowly dimmed as he started believing he really was a bad kid who caused problems everywhere he went. I tell Rachel about finding Tommy in his room one night trying to figure out what was wrong with him that made Aiden's behavior his fault, and how he asked me if maybe he was a bad person without knowing it. My voice gets thick as I explain the way Tommy started flinching when Rachel's name came up, how he begged not to go to family gatherings because he knew something would get broken and he'd get blamed. I pull out my phone and open the video compilation, and Beverly gently suggests that maybe Rachel should watch it again now that some time has passed. Rachel resists at first, saying she's already seen it, but Beverly quietly insists that she needs to really look at what was happening. I hand my phone to Rachel and she starts watching, her face tight and defensive at first. But as the videos play, showing Aiden deliberately breaking things and then laughing about getting Tommy in trouble, I see her expression start to crumble. The video where Aiden whispers to Tommy that he'll blame him for something worse next time makes Rachel's hand fly to her mouth and tears start sliding down her face. She watches herself in the background of several clips, rewarding Aiden with treats and praise for being such a good boy, while Tommy cries in the corner and her whole body starts shaking. By the time the compilation ends, Rachel is sobbing into her hands, her shoulders heaving with the force of it. Beverly lets Rachel cry for a few minutes before gently asking if she's ready to talk about what she saw. Rachel wipes her face with shaking hands and says she couldn't let herself see how bad Aiden's behavior really was, because admitting it felt like admitting she was a terrible mother. She explains that she kept blaming Tommy because it was easier than facing that her son had serious problems she'd been ignoring for years. Rachel says she knew deep down that some of the accusations didn't make sense, but she convinced herself Tommy was sneakier than he seemed because the alternative was too scary to accept. She looks at me directly for the first time since arriving and says she's so sorry for what she put Tommy through, her voice breaking on every word. Beverly waits to make sure Rachel is finished, then points out that both boys are now dealing with anxiety and nightmares because of how the adults handled the situation. She says we're at a crossroads where we can either keep hurting each other through lawyers and demands, or we can focus on helping Tommy and Aiden heal from the damage that's already been done. Beverly reminds us that we're family, and these boys are cousins who will be in each other's lives for years to come, so we need to find a way forward that protects them instead of using them as weapons against each other. Rachel nods slowly and admits that threatening to sue me was her way of trying to regain some control after feeling so powerless and humiliated at the wedding. I take a deep breath and acknowledge that setting up Aiden at the wedding was wrong, even though I was desperate to protect Tommy and expose the truth. The conversation continues for nearly 2 hours, painful and difficult but necessary, as Beverly guides us toward finding solutions instead of assigning blame. Rachel admits she can't actually afford the therapy costs she demanded in her lawyer's letter, and that Chloe warned her the defamation case was weak, but Rachel was too angry to listen. I tell Rachel I understand her rage and humiliation, because I felt those same things every time Tommy got punished for something Aiden did. We slowly work toward an agreement, with Beverly writing down each point we agree on, to make sure we're both clear about what we're committing to. Rachel and I both agree to drop all legal threats immediately, and focus our energy and money on getting our sons the help they need. I promise not to share the videos beyond the family members who've already seen them, and Rachel agrees to write a letter to the family taking full responsibility for falsely accusing Tommy over the past year. We decide to stay away from each other at family gatherings for at least 6 months, while we each work with our sons on healing and processing what happened. Beverly suggests we should both get our kids into therapy as soon as possible, and Rachel says she'll call a child psychologist on Monday to set up appointments for Aiden. I tell her about Mildred and how helpful Tommy's sessions have been, and Rachel writes down the name to see if Mildred has availability for Aiden too. We agree that eventually the boys might need a mediated conversation to process their relationship, but not until both of them are emotionally ready for that step. Beverly drafts a simple written agreement outlining everything we've discussed, and both Rachel and I sign it before leaving. I text Wallace a photo of the signed agreement as soon as I get to my car, and he responds within minutes saying it looks solid, and he'll review it properly tomorrow to make sure it's legally binding. Tommy's next therapy appointment is 3 days after the mediation, and Mildred asks how I'm doing before we start talking about Tommy's progress. I tell her about the conversation with Rachel and the agreement we reached, and Mildred says she's glad we found a way to resolve things without putting the boys through a legal battle. She brings Tommy in, and they work together on a drawing activity, where he's supposed to illustrate how he felt during different parts of the past year. Tommy draws himself very small in one picture, surrounded by huge angry faces, and labels it as how he felt when everyone blamed him for things. In another picture, he draws himself bigger with a few smiling faces around him, and he says that's how he feels now that people believe him. The difference between the two images makes my chest ache because I can see exactly how the false accusations affected his sense of self and safety. Mildred shows me the drawings after the session and explains that Tommy's making excellent progress in processing his feelings, but he'll need continued support for several more months. She says the fact that the family conflict is resolving will help Tommy feel safer, and that consistency in his environment is crucial for his healing. I ask how to help Tommy at home, and Mildred schedules a parent session for the following week where she can give me specific strategies and tools. The parent session with Mildred focuses on practical ways I can support Tommy's emotional recovery in daily life. She explains that Tommy needs constant reassurance that he's believed and valued, not just about the past incidents, but about everything he tells me going forward. Mildred says I should avoid putting Tommy in situations with Aiden until Tommy specifically says he's ready, and that forcing contact before he feels safe could undo the progress he's made. She teaches me how to recognize when Tommy's feeling anxious about being blamed, and how to help him work through those feelings using the coping strategies they've practiced in therapy. Mildred gently suggests that I might benefit from my own therapy to process the guilt and anger I'm carrying about how I handled the situation with Rachel. She says parents often need support too when their children have been hurt, and that working through my feelings will help me be more present for Tommy. I resist at first because therapy feels like admitting I did something wrong, but Mildred reminds me that seeking help is actually a sign of strength and self-awareness. I leave her office with a referral to a therapist who specializes in helping parents navigate family conflict, and I call to make an appointment that same afternoon. Rachel sends her letter to the family 4 days after our mediation, a carefully worded message taking full responsibility for falsely accusing Tommy and apologizing for the pain she caused him. Several relatives call or text me within hours of receiving it, saying they're sorry for not believing Tommy sooner and for making him feel unsafe at family gatherings. Uncle James leaves a voicemail saying he's ashamed that he saw signs of Aiden lying, but stayed quiet to avoid family drama, and that he should have protected Tommy instead of protecting his own comfort. Grandmother calls that evening and says she's proud of Rachel and me for finding a way to resolve things that focuses on healing rather than revenge. She tells me she's reduced her demand for reimbursement to just the cost of replacing the antique vase, which was the first thing Aiden broke that started this whole pattern. Grandmother says Rachel has agreed to pay for the vase in monthly installments and that she's not going to pursue payment for all the other items because she wants to help Rachel afford Aiden's therapy instead. I'm touched by grandmother's compassion and her recognition that punishing Rachel financially won't help either boy heal from what happened. My first therapy appointment is awkward because I'm not used to talking about my feelings with a stranger, but my therapist makes it easier by focusing on specific events rather than vague emotions. She asks me to walk through the decision to set up Aiden at the wedding, and I explain the months of watching Tommy suffer and feeling powerless to stop it. My therapist helps me understand that I was operating from a place of protective rage, that primal instinct to defend my child at any cost. But she also gently points out that using Aiden as part of my revenge plan crossed a moral line, regardless of how justified my anger was toward Rachel. She guides me through accepting that both things can be true at the same time, that I can acknowledge my actions were wrong while still believing I was right to expose Rachel's lies and protect Tommy. My therapist says the goal isn't to make me feel guilty forever, but to help me process what happened so I can move forward without carrying this weight. We schedule weekly sessions for the next month, and I leave feeling like maybe I can eventually forgive myself for the choices I made. Tommy asks me that night if he'll ever have to see Aiden again, his voice small and worried as we sit together on his bed. I'm honest with him that they're cousins, so they'll probably be at some family events together eventually, but I promise him that won't happen until he feels ready. I tell Tommy I'll never force him to be around Aiden if he's uncomfortable, and that his feelings and safety matter more than any family gathering or holiday celebration. He thinks about this for a long moment, then says maybe when he's bigger and stronger, he won't be scared of Aiden anymore. I hug him tight and tell him he's already so brave for working through his feelings in therapy, and for telling me when he's scared, and that being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. Tommy seems satisfied with this answer, and asks if we can watch a movie together, and I'm grateful that he still feels safe enough with me to ask for comfort when he needs it. 2 months pass, and my aunt calls to say she's organizing a small family dinner at her house, just the adults to talk about how we'll handle future gatherings. My stomach twists when she mentions Rachel will be there, but I agree to come because avoiding each other forever isn't realistic when we share so much family. The dinner is on a Thursday evening, and I arrive early, helping my aunt set out plates and silverware while my nerves build with each passing minute. Rachel walks in looking completely different from the confident, defensive woman I remember from before the mediation. Her face is drawn and tired, dark circles under her eyes making her look years older than she actually is. She sits across the table from me and barely makes eye contact as other relatives filter in and take their seats. My aunt starts the conversation by saying we need clear guidelines for family events going forward, so both boys feel safe and supervised. Rachel speaks up first, and her voice is quiet and shaky, as she reports that Aiden has been going to therapy twice a week, and is finally starting to take responsibility for what he did to Tommy. She says his therapist has been working with him on understanding consequences and empathy, and that some days are better than others, but there's real progress happening. The exhaustion in her face isn't just physical tiredness, but something deeper, like she's carrying the weight of all the denial and mistakes that led to this point. I watch her fidget with her napkin and realize this whole experience has fundamentally changed how she sees her son and her own parenting, that she can't hide behind excuses anymore. Uncle James suggests we write down specific rules about supervision and accountability, and everyone agrees that's a good starting point. We spend the next hour creating guidelines that include never leaving the kids alone together without an adult present, immediately addressing any conflict or broken item instead of making assumptions, and having a designated adult responsible for watching the children at each gathering. Aunt Beverly apologizes directly to me across the table and says she should have questioned Rachel's accusations sooner instead of just going along with the family narrative. She admits she saw Tommy's distress, but convinced herself Rachel must know her own son's behavior better than outsiders could judge. Uncle James clears his throat and says he actually witnessed Aiden lying about Tommy on 2 separate occasions, but didn't call it out because he didn't want to cause drama or take sides in a family conflict. His admission makes my blood boil because Tommy suffered while adults who knew the truth stayed silent to avoid uncomfortable conversations. But I force myself to stay calm and focus on moving forward instead of relitigating every failure that got us here. Several other relatives offer their own apologies and acknowledgments of how they failed Tommy by believing Rachel's version without question. The conversation is painful and awkward with long silences where people stare at their plates, but my aunt keeps us on track by redirecting to practical solutions whenever emotions threaten to derail the discussion. By the end of dinner, we've established clear protocols and everyone commits to doing better at future gatherings, to actually paying attention instead of letting one parent's narrative dominate. Rachel leaves quickly after we finish talking, and I notice she doesn't linger to chat with anyone the way she used to at family events. Tommy has his regular therapy appointment 3 days later, and I sit in the waiting room flipping through a magazine without actually reading it. Mildred comes out after the session and asks if I can join them for the last few minutes, and I follow her back to the office where Tommy sits cross-legged on the floor with drawings spread around him. Mildred explains that Tommy had a major breakthrough today, where he was able to put words to feelings he's been carrying for months. Tommy looks up at me with serious eyes and says he's been angry at the grown-ups for not believing him, not just at Aiden and Rachel. His voice is small but steady as he explains that the adults were supposed to protect him and keep him safe, but instead they punished him and made him apologize for things he didn't do. Mildred has been helping him express this anger through drawing and role-playing, teaching him that it's okay to be mad at people you love when they let you down. She looks at me and says I need to validate Tommy's feelings instead of defending the family members who failed him, that he needs to hear from me that his anger is justified and reasonable. I kneel down next to Tommy on the floor and tell him he's absolutely right to be angry at the adults, including me, for not protecting him better. I say the grown-ups should have listened to him and believed him from the very beginning, and that we all made mistakes that hurt him badly. Tommy's eyes fill with tears, and he hugs me tight, and I feel him relax in my arms like he's been waiting months to hear someone validate his experience. Mildred smiles and says this is huge progress, that acknowledging anger at trusted adults is often harder for kids than being angry at peers. We schedule next week's appointment, and Tommy chatters in the car about a game he played during the session, seeming lighter than he has in weeks. Julia's 1-month anniversary party arrives, and I show up carrying the replacement cake I promised. A beautiful 3-tier design with intricate frosting flowers that cost me $400. Julia opens the door and her face lights up when she sees the cake, pulling me into a hug and thanking me for following through on my offer. She says she really appreciates the gesture, and that she's glad Rachel and I managed to work things out through mediation, instead of destroying each other in court. The party is small with just close family and a few friends, and the atmosphere is relaxed and happy without the tension that's marked every family gathering since the wedding. I watch Julia and her husband cut into the cake together, while guests applaud, and it feels like a small act of restoration for the damage my revenge plan caused to her special day. People compliment the cake's design and taste, and Julia makes a point of telling everyone I provided it as a replacement for the original. Rachel isn't at the party, which makes sense given that Julia probably didn't want any awkwardness at her celebration, and I'm relieved not to navigate that interaction yet. Julia pulls me aside later and says her mother-in-law has finally stopped bringing up the wedding cake incident now that there's been a proper replacement and resolution. She admits the whole situation caused some tension in her new marriage because her husband's family kept asking why her cousin would destroy the cake, and it became this thing she had to keep explaining. I apologize again for making her wedding memorable for all the wrong reasons, and she squeezes my hand and says she understands why I did it even if the timing was terrible. For the first time in months, I feel like maybe the family can actually heal from all of this, that we're not permanently broken by what happened. I run into Rachel at grandmother's house the following week when we both stop by for a brief visit. The encounter is completely unplanned, and we both freeze in the hallway when we see each other, neither of us sure how to act. We end up in the kitchen together while grandmother is in another room, and the silence stretches awkward and uncomfortable between us. Rachel finally speaks and asks how Tommy is doing, and I tell her he's making good progress in therapy. I ask about Aiden, and she says his therapist thinks he's ready to eventually apologize to Tommy, but only when both boys are emotionally prepared for that conversation. Her tone is careful and measured, like she's trying hard not to say anything that might restart our conflict. We talk about practical things like therapy schedules and family gathering plans, keeping everything focused on the kids rather than our personal feelings about each other. It's stilted and strange, but we manage to be civil, which feels like a significant achievement given how much anger and hurt exists between us. Rachel mentions she's been taking parenting classes in addition to Aiden's therapy, trying to learn better ways to handle his behavior and her own reactions. I can see the effort she's putting into changing, even if part of me is still angry about all the damage that came before this growth. We keep the conversation brief and both leave grandmother's house within minutes of each other, but something about the interaction feels like progress even in its awkwardness. Mildred schedules a progress evaluation for Tommy after 3 months of consistent weekly sessions. She goes through her notes and observations, telling me that Tommy is doing remarkably well considering the psychological impact of being falsely blamed for months. His anxiety has decreased significantly based on the assessments she's been running, and he started talking about family events without the visible stress responses he showed initially. She shows me drawings Tommy made in early sessions compared to recent ones, and the difference is striking in how he portrays himself and family members. Mildred recommends continuing weekly sessions for another month to solidify his progress, then transitioning to every other week as he continues to improve. She says Tommy has developed good coping strategies for managing anxiety when it does appear, and he's learned to communicate his feelings instead of internalizing them. I feel overwhelming relief hearing that my son is healing, that the damage Rachel caused isn't permanent and fixable with proper support. Mildred reminds me that trauma responses can resurface during stressful times, so I should stay alert to any regression in his behavior. But overall, she's confident Tommy has the tools now to handle challenges in healthy ways, and she's proud of how hard he's worked in therapy. I leave her office feeling lighter than I have in months, finally believing that Tommy will be okay. My phone rings with an unknown number, and I almost don't answer, but something makes me pick up. Chloe's professional voice comes through saying she's calling to officially close Rachel's file since both parties reached a mediated agreement. She mentions that she advised Rachel from the very beginning that the defamation case was weak, given my extensive video evidence, but Rachel had been too angry and hurt to listen to legal counsel initially. Chloe's tone carries a slight apologetic quality, as she confirms everything is legally resolved, and no further action will be taken by either side. She says she's filing the closure paperwork with the court today, and wanted to give me a courtesy call, so I'd know the matter is completely finished. I thank her for the call and hang up feeling like a weight has lifted, knowing there's no lawsuit hanging over my head anymore. The legal threat was always there in the background, creating low-level stress even after the mediation, and having official confirmation it's done helps me breathe easier. I text Wallace to let him know about Chloe's call, and he responds saying he'll send me a final invoice for his services, and congratulations on resolving everything without litigation. The whole legal aspect of this mess cost me thousands of dollars between Wallace's fees and Tommy's therapy. But at least it's over now, and I can focus on moving forward instead of defending myself in court. Grandmother's birthday party looms as the first major family gathering since the wedding, and Rachel and I already agreed through my aunt that we'd both attend but maintain distance. Tommy is nervous about going and asks multiple times if Aiden will be there, his anxiety spiking at the thought of seeing his cousin again. Mildred spent the previous session preparing Tommy with coping strategies if he feels overwhelmed, teaching him breathing exercises and giving him permission to tell me if he needs to leave. We arrive at grandmother's house and Tommy grips my hand tight as we walk through the door, his eyes scanning the room immediately for Aiden. I spot Rachel across the living room with Aiden standing close beside her, and I notice immediately how different their dynamic looks. Rachel has her hand on Aiden's shoulder, and she's actively watching him instead of being distracted by conversations with other adults. Aiden stays near his mother instead of running off to cause chaos like he used to, and when other kids invite him to play, he looks at Rachel first as if checking for permission. Tommy relaxes slightly when he sees that Aiden isn't approaching him, and I guide him toward the cousins he's comfortable with. Throughout the party, I keep one eye on Tommy while trying to appear relaxed and normal, ready to intervene if he shows any signs of distress. Rachel and I make brief eye contact across the room once, but we don't approach each other, respecting the distance we agreed to maintain. The party continues for 3 hours without any incidents or drama, just normal family celebration with cake and presents and conversation. Tommy actually starts enjoying himself once he realizes Aiden isn't going to bother him or get him in trouble. Several cousins make a point of including Tommy in their games, and I suspect they're trying to make up for the months they doubted him and treated him with suspicion. They let Tommy choose which game to play first and cheer enthusiastically when he wins, creating positive interactions that help rebuild his comfort with family gatherings. I watch him laugh and run around with the other kids, seeing glimpses of the carefree boy he was before Rachel's accusations damaged his confidence. Grandmother calls everyone for cake, and Tommy sits between two cousins who chat with him like nothing bad ever happened between them. When we're leaving, Tommy surprises me by saying it was actually fun and maybe family parties won't be so bad anymore. His words make my eyes water because I've been so worried that the trauma would make him fear and avoid family forever. I hug him in the car and tell him I'm proud of how brave he was today, and he just shrugs like it's no big deal, even though I know it took real courage for him to walk into that party. 3 months after the mediation, Rachel sends me a text asking if we could talk, because Aiden's therapist believes he's ready to apologize to Tommy. My first instinct is to refuse because I don't want Tommy anywhere near Aiden, but I force myself to consider whether this might actually help both boys move forward. I call Mildred before responding to Rachel and explain the situation, asking if she thinks Tommy is emotionally ready for this conversation. Mildred thinks carefully and says she's willing to facilitate the apology in her office where Tommy feels safe and supported, and that having a controlled environment with professional guidance could actually be beneficial. She emphasizes that this has to be Tommy's choice and we can't force him into it, so I need to present the option without pressure. That evening, I sit down with Tommy and explain that Aiden wants to apologize for lying and getting him in trouble, and that Mildred would be there the whole time to help both boys talk. Tommy is quiet for a long moment, his face serious as he thinks it through. Finally, he says he wants to hear what Aiden has to say, but only if I'm there too, and we can leave if he gets scared. I promise him both those things and text Rachel back that we'll schedule it through Mildred for 2 weeks out, giving Tommy time to prepare mentally. Mildred coordinates with Aiden's therapist to plan the session structure, and I spend the next 2 weeks checking in regularly with Tommy about how he's feeling about the upcoming meeting. The day of the apology session arrives, and I drive Tommy to Mildred's office with my stomach tight with nerves about how this will go. Tommy sits quietly in the back seat, clutching a small stuffed bear that Mildred suggested he bring for comfort during difficult moments. We arrive 10 minutes early and wait in the parking lot until exactly our appointment time because Tommy says he doesn't want to see Aiden before Mildred is there to help. Rachel's car pulls in right as we're walking toward the building entrance, and Aiden looks small and scared in a way I've never seen him before. Mildred greets us at her office door with her usual warm smile and guides both families into her therapy room where she's arranged chairs in a circle. She explains the structure carefully so both boys understand what will happen and that either of them can ask for a break if they need one. Aiden sits between Rachel and his chair, holding a folded piece of paper that I realize must be the letter he wrote. Mildred starts by asking Aiden if he's ready to share what he wrote, and he nods slowly before unfolding the paper with shaking hands. His voice is quiet and wobbly as he reads about how he lied and got Tommy in trouble, and how he knows that was wrong and mean. He talks about feeling bad when he saw Tommy crying, but not stopping because he liked the attention he got from his mom when Tommy was blamed. The words surprise me because they sound genuinely thought out and honest in a way I didn't expect from an 8-year-old who's been so cruel. Aiden looks up from the paper and directly at Tommy for the first time, saying he's sorry for scaring him and hurting him and making him feel bad. Tommy's face is serious and still as he listens, his hands gripping the stuffed bear tightly in his lap. Mildred gently asks Tommy if he'd like to respond to what Aiden shared, and Tommy takes a deep breath before speaking. He tells Aiden that what he did really hurt and made him scared to go to family parties because he never knew what he'd get blamed for next. Tommy's voice gets stronger as he talks about feeling like nobody believed him even when he told the truth. He says he felt like he was a bad kid, even though he wasn't doing anything wrong, and that made him sad all the time. Aiden's eyes fill with tears as Tommy talks, and I see Rachel's hand move to her son's shoulder in support. Mildred guides them through more conversation about feelings and consequences, helping both boys understand each other's experiences without placing blame or making excuses. By the end of the session, the air in the room feels lighter somehow, like a pressure has been released even though I know both boys still have a long way to go. Tommy and Aiden aren't friends, and probably never will be, but there's a sense that they've both been heard, and that matters more than I realized it would. Rachel and I leave the boys with Mildred for a few final minutes while we wait in the small coffee shop next to her office building. We order drinks in awkward silence and sit at a corner table away from other customers who are working on laptops or reading. Rachel stirs sugar into her coffee for longer than necessary before finally looking up at me with tired eyes. She tells me she's been taking parenting classes twice a week to learn how to set better boundaries with Aiden and hold him accountable for his actions. The classes are expensive and she has to drive 40 minutes each way, but she says they're helping her understand where she went wrong. She admits she was terrified of being seen as a bad mother, which made her defensive whenever anyone suggested Aiden had behavioral problems. Rachel says she couldn't face that her son was lying and being destructive because it felt like a direct reflection of her parenting failures. Her voice cracks slightly as she talks about how she convinced herself that Tommy was the problem, because that was easier than accepting the truth about Aiden. I listen without interrupting, letting her get everything out that she needs to say. When she finishes, I share that I've been working through my own guilt in therapy about how I handled the wedding situation. I tell her I was so focused on protecting Tommy and exposing her lies that I didn't think enough about how using Aiden would affect him long-term. We sit there acknowledging that we both made serious mistakes driven by fear and anger and desperation to protect our kids. Rachel reaches across the table and squeezes my hand briefly before pulling back, and the gesture feels like a tiny step towards something that might eventually become forgiveness. We finish our coffee and head back to Mildred's office to collect our sons, both of us emotionally drained but somehow lighter than when we arrived. That night after Tommy's bedtime routine, I sit on the edge of his bed and ask how he's feeling after the apology session with Aiden. Tommy is quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on his blanket while he thinks about his answer. He finally says he feels better after hearing Aiden say sorry and admit that he lied, but he still doesn't want to be friends with him. I assure Tommy that's completely okay, and he never has to be close to Aiden or spend time with him beyond being civil at family events. Tommy's whole body relaxes at my words like he's been holding tension waiting to hear that it's acceptable to maintain distance from his cousin. He asks if that means he's being mean by not wanting to be Aiden's friend, and I explain that protecting your own feelings and setting boundaries isn't mean. It's healthy. I tell him I'm proud of how he's learning to speak up about what he needs emotionally, and that he should always tell me if something makes him uncomfortable. Tommy smiles and hugs his stuffed bear closer before asking if we can read an extra story tonight. We spend 20 minutes reading his favorite book about a brave mouse who goes on adventures, and by the time I turn off his light, he's already half asleep with a peaceful expression on his face. 2 weeks later, I attend a family dinner at grandmother's house without bringing Tommy, because the adults want to discuss the progress both boys have made. I feel strange walking into the house alone after months of having Tommy by my side at every family gathering. Rachel arrives a few minutes after me, and we exchange polite greetings before joining the other relatives in the dining room. Grandmother has made her famous pot roast, and the smell fills the house with familiar comfort. The conversation during dinner centers on how much both Tommy and Aiden have improved with their therapy and support. Rachel shares that Aiden is doing better in the school now that she's working with his teachers to address his behavioral issues consistently. She says he's made friends with a boy in his class and seems happier overall, even though he still has difficult days. I talk about Tommy's progress with Mildred and how his confidence has returned along with his natural cheerful personality. Several relatives comment that the whole situation, while incredibly painful for everyone involved, has made the family more aware of how we handle conflict and accountability. Uncle James says he's learned to speak up when he sees problems instead of avoiding them to keep peace. Aunt Beverly admits she should have questioned Rachel's accusations sooner, instead of just accepting them as truth. The conversation continues with various family members sharing what they've learned and how they plan to do better going forward. I feel grateful for their honesty and willingness to acknowledge their roles in what happened to Tommy. After dinner, grandmother pulls me aside into her sitting room where family photos line the walls in neat frames. She tells me she's proud of how I protected Tommy, even though she wishes I'd found a different way to expose the truth. Her words make my eyes sting with unexpected tears because her approval matters more than I realized. Grandmother reaches into her purse and pulls out a folded check, pressing it into my hands before I can protest. I open it to see $500 made out to me with Tommy's therapy, written in the memo line. She says she should have stepped in sooner to stop Rachel's accusations, and this is her way of taking responsibility for failing Tommy when he needed adult protection. I try to give the check back, but grandmother closes my hands around it firmly and says she won't take no for an answer. I hug her tightly and thank her for the gesture, and for acknowledging that the adults failed Tommy during those months of false blame. Grandmother pats my back and says Tommy is lucky to have a mother who fights for him even when the methods aren't perfect. We rejoin the family in the dining room, and I tuck the check safely into my purse, touched by her recognition of what we've been through. Tommy's next therapy appointment brings good news when Mildred announces he's ready to graduate from weekly sessions to bi-weekly meetings. She explains that he's made remarkable progress in processing his trauma and rebuilding his sense of safety within the family. Mildred says Tommy is one of the most resilient kids she's worked with, and she's impressed by how hard he's worked to develop healthy coping strategies. His confidence has returned, and he's back to being the cheerful, energetic boy he was before Rachel's accusations damaged his self-esteem. Tommy still has occasional moments of anxiety when he worries about being blamed for things he didn't do, but Mildred has taught him techniques to work through those feelings when they arise. She demonstrates the breathing exercises and positive self-talk that Tommy has been practicing during their sessions. I watch Tommy show me how he counts to 5 while breathing deeply, and reminds himself that people believe him now. Mildred gives Tommy a certificate celebrating his hard work in therapy, and he beams with pride as he reads his name printed in fancy letters. She tells him he can always come back if he needs support in the future, but she's confident he has the tools to handle challenges that come his way. On the drive home, Tommy asks if we can hang his certificate on the refrigerator so everyone can see it, and I agree immediately, proud of his accomplishment. 6 months after the wedding incident, the family plans a big 4th of July barbecue at Uncle James's house with his large backyard perfect for the celebration. Both Rachel and I have confirmed we'll attend with our kids, marking the first major gathering where Tommy and Aiden will be in the same space since the apology session. I feel nervous as we pull up to the house and see Rachel's car already parked in the driveway. Tommy grabs my hand as we walk toward the backyard gate, and I give it a reassuring squeeze. The yard is decorated with red, white, and blue streamers, and several relatives are already setting up food tables and arranging lawn chairs. Tommy spots his cousins playing cornhole near the fence and runs over to join them after a quick glance around to locate where Aiden is standing. I watch as Tommy integrates himself into the game easily, laughing and cheering when he makes a good throw. Aiden stays near the food table with Rachel, helping her arrange plates and napkins without venturing toward the other kids. Throughout the afternoon, the boys maintain their distance naturally, playing in different areas of the yard without any tension or drama between them. I catch Rachel's eye across the yard a few times, and we exchange small nods of acknowledgement. Tommy plays tag with cousins, helps grandmother carry watermelon slices to the dessert table, and participates in the water balloon toss without a single moment of visible anxiety. I feel overwhelming relief watching him laugh and run around freely, truly healing from everything he went through during those terrible months of false accusations. As the sun starts to set and families begin gathering blankets for the fireworks show, I find myself standing near the dessert table arranging sparklers for the kids. Rachel approaches and stands beside me, both of us watching our sons from a distance. She thanks me quietly for agreeing to mediation, instead of letting the lawyers drag us through expensive court battles. Rachel admits the whole experience forced her to become a better parent and face truths about Aiden's behavior she'd been avoiding for years. She says she's still angry about how I set up the wedding cake incident and used Aiden as part of my plan. But she also says she understands why I felt desperate enough to do something so extreme after watching Tommy suffer for so long. I tell her I'm genuinely sorry for using Aiden the way I did, and for not considering how public humiliation would affect an 8-year-old child. We stand in silence for a moment, both of us holding complicated feelings about what happened and how we've moved forward. Rachel mentions that Aiden's therapist says he's processing the wedding incident in healthy ways and learning to take responsibility for his actions. I share that Tommy still has occasional anxiety, but overall he's doing remarkably well. Our conversation feels tentative but real, like we're both trying to find our way towards something that resembles peace. Uncle James walks over with paper plates full of potato salad and notices Rachel and me talking without visible tension. He comments that he's glad to see us getting along and that the family was worried we'd never be able to exist in the same room again. James says we've both shown real maturity in working through such a painful conflict, instead of letting it destroy family relationships permanently. His words feel like an acknowledgement from the family that they recognize how hard we've both worked to move past the anger and hurt. He mentions that watching us handle this situation has taught him valuable lessons about accountability and forgiveness that he's applying in his own life. Rachel and I thank him for his support during the mediation process and for being willing to host this gathering where both families could attend. James pats us both on the shoulder before heading back to help grandmother with the fireworks setup. I feel a warmth in my chest at his recognition of our efforts, grateful that the family sees we're trying to do better. Tommy comes running up to me with a drawing he made with one of his cousins during a quiet moment earlier in the afternoon. His face is bright with happiness as he unfolds the paper to show me a picture of stick figures playing in a yard with a big sun overhead. He points to each figure and names which cousin it represents, his voice excited and proud. I kneel down to his level and tell him the drawing is beautiful, and I love how happy all the stick figures look. Tommy asks if we can put it on the refrigerator next to his therapy certificate, and I promise we will as soon as we get home. In this moment, watching my son's face glow with genuine joy and security, I realize we've reached a place where Tommy feels safe and believed within the family. That was always the goal even when I lost sight of it in my anger at Rachel and my desperate need to protect him. Tommy hugs me quickly before running back to join his cousins for the fireworks show, and I stay kneeling in the grass for an extra moment, letting the relief and gratitude wash over me. The path here was messy and painful, and full of mistakes I'll always regret. But my son is healing and happy, and that's what matters most. The sun starts dipping lower as people begin gathering their things, and I help fold up chairs while Uncle James carries the cooler back to his truck. Aunt Beverly walks over with a stack of paper plates and she stops next to me for a moment. She tells me she's really glad Tommy is doing so much better now, and her voice sounds different from it used to, softer somehow. She admits she should have questioned Rachel's accusations sooner instead of just going along with what everyone else believed. I feel something loosen in my chest at her words because I've been carrying around this weight of feeling judged by the whole family for how I handled everything. She squeezes my shoulder before heading inside with the plates, and I watch her go while feeling less alone than I have in months. Other relatives make similar comments as they help clean up, small acknowledgments that they see how hard we've all worked to fix this mess. The atmosphere feels relaxed and warm in a way family gatherings haven't felt since before all this started, and I let myself enjoy it without waiting for something to go wrong. Rachel comes out of the house with Aiden, and I notice immediately how different she looks with him. She's got her hand on his shoulder in this gentle way, actually listening when he talks about something that happened during the party. Aiden looks different too, less wild and jumpy, more settled in his own skin. His face doesn't have that manic edge it used to get at family events, and he's not scanning around for his next opportunity to cause chaos. I realize that getting him proper help was probably the best thing that came out of this whole disaster, even though the path to get there was awful. Both boys are better off now than they were when Rachel was in denial about Aiden's behavior, and Tommy was getting blamed for everything. Rachel catches me watching and gives this small nod before loading Aiden into her car, and I nod back. We're not friends, and maybe we never will be, but we're both trying to do better by our kids, and that's what matters most right now. Tommy bounces up to me as we're walking to our car, and he asks if we can go to the next family party too. His voice is excited and happy, no trace of the fear that used to creep in whenever I mentioned family gatherings. I tell him of course we can go, and I feel this rush of relief and joy that he's not dreading these events anymore. He chatters the whole drive home about the games he played with his cousins and the food he ate, going on about how he won at tag and how grandmother's potato salad was really good. There's no mention of fear or anxiety or worrying about what Aiden might do, just normal kid excitement about a fun party. Mildred was right when she said kids are remarkably tough when given proper support and a safe place to heal. Tommy has proven that over and over these past months, working through his feelings and learning to trust again. I reach over and ruffle his hair at a stoplight, and he grins at me before launching into another story about the party. My final therapy session comes up the following week, and my therapist helps me work through the lingering guilt about the wedding incident. She tells me I can hold two truths at the same time without one canceling out the other. I was wrong to manipulate Aiden and use him as part of my revenge plan, but I was also right to protect Tommy and expose the truth about what was really happening. She encourages me to forgive myself for acting imperfectly in an impossible situation, to stop beating myself up for not handling everything perfectly when there was no perfect way to handle it. The focus needs to be on the positive changes that came from all this, the way both families are healthier now than they were before. I leave her office feeling lighter, like I've finally set down this heavy thing I've been carrying around for months. The guilt is still there, but it's not crushing me anymore, and I can look at the whole situation with more clarity and less shame. Grandmother calls a few weeks later and invites just Rachel, me, and our kids over for a small dinner. She wants to see how Tommy and Aiden interact in a controlled setting now that they've both been in therapy for a while. I'm nervous about it, but I agree because I trust grandmother to keep things calm and supervised. When we arrive, Aiden is already there playing with some toys in the living room. Tommy sees him and stays close to me for a minute before going to find his own toys in a different corner. They're polite to each other when grandmother introduces them again, saying hi and making eye contact. But there's no warmth between them. They play separate games and don't seek each other out, which feels appropriate and healthy given their history. There's no tension or fear, though, just two kids who don't particularly like each other staying in their own spaces. Rachel and I end up sitting at the kitchen table while grandmother cooks, and we talk about normal things like Tommy's upcoming school projects and Aiden's soccer practice. The conversation feels surprisingly natural, like we're just two cousins catching up instead of two people who almost destroyed each other's lives. Tommy completes his therapy with Mildred after 4 months of steady work, and she gives him a certificate celebrating his courage and growth. He holds it carefully in both hands and studies it with this proud look on his face that makes my throat tight. I tell him I'm so proud of him for being brave enough to work through his feelings, and he asks if we can hang the certificate on the refrigerator next to his drawings. Mildred tells me I can contact her anytime if Tommy needs support in the future, but she's confident he has the tools to handle challenges now. She's taught him ways to manage his anxiety and speak up when he feels unsafe, and I've seen him use those skills in real situations. We leave her office for the last time, and Tommy skips ahead to the car while I carry his folder of therapy worksheets and drawings. He's worked so hard to heal from what Rachel and Aiden put him through, and watching him skip across the parking lot makes me believe we're finally past the worst of it. The family establishes a new tradition of monthly gatherings that rotate between different relatives' houses, and everyone agrees to follow the supervision and accountability guidelines we created after the mediation. These gatherings feel more intentional and mindful than the old ones used to be, with adults actually paying attention to how the kids interact instead of just letting them run wild. Uncle James hosts the first one at his house and makes a point of checking in with all the kids throughout the afternoon. Aunt Beverly helps organize games that keep the kids engaged and supervised, and grandmother circulates making sure everyone feels included and safe. The whole family seems more aware and engaged than before, which was an unexpected positive outcome from all the conflict and pain. I watch Tommy playing with his cousins in James's backyard and see multiple adults keeping an eye on the group, ready to step in if any problems start. It's the kind of supervision Tommy should have had all along, the kind that might have prevented months of false accusations and trauma. Tommy's 7th birthday arrives in late summer, and my phone buzzes with a text from Rachel. She says she hopes he has a wonderful day, and that she's grateful he's doing so well. It's a small gesture, but it means something that she's thinking of Tommy as a person she cares about, rather than someone who threatened her narrative about Aiden. I respond thanking her and saying I hope Aiden continues to do well in therapy, and I mean it. Both boys deserve to be happy and healthy, and I'm glad Rachel is finally giving Aiden the help and structure he needs. Tommy has a great birthday party with his friends from the school, and he doesn't mention Aiden or Rachel once the entire day. His world has gotten bigger than just family drama, and that's exactly how it should be for a 7-year-old kid. Thanksgiving comes around nearly a year after the garden incident that started this whole nightmare, and both families show up at grandmother's house. I'm nervous walking in with Tommy, worried that something will go wrong or old tensions will flare up, but the atmosphere is genuinely pleasant. Tommy runs off to play with his cousins without hesitation, no fear or anxiety visible in his movements or his face. I watch him laughing and being silly with the other kids, completely confident and secure in a way he hasn't been at family events in over a year. Rachel is there with Aiden, and they stay on the other side of the room for most of the afternoon, but it's not hostile or tense. We're just two families existing in the same space without drama or conflict, and that feels like a massive victory after everything we went through. I help grandmother set the table and feel overwhelmed with gratitude that we made it through to this place of healing, that my son can be happy and carefree at family gatherings again. Rachel and I end up doing dishes together after Thanksgiving dinner, working side by side in grandmother's kitchen while the kids play in the living room. We talk about our kids' progress in the school and upcoming winter events, and there's a comfortable ease between us that would have seemed impossible a year ago. She mentions that Aiden's therapist says he's doing remarkably well and has developed much better skills for managing his emotions and behavior. I tell her about Tommy's recent school project and how confident he's become in class, no longer worried that people won't believe him when he speaks up. We wash and dry plates in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and I realize we found a way to exist as family members who went through something terrible together and came out the other side. We're not close and probably never will be, but we can stand next to each other doing dishes and talking about our kids without anger or resentment taking over. That's enough, and maybe it's even better than trying to force a friendship that neither of us really wants. Grandmother stands up at the head of the table, tapping her wine glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. The room goes quiet as all the relatives turn toward her, and I feel my heart beat faster, wondering what she's going to say. She looks around at everyone gathered there, her eyes landing on Tommy and then on Aiden before she starts speaking. She says this past year has been one of the hardest our family has faced in a long time, but she's proud of how we've all worked through it together. She talks about how both Tommy and Aiden have shown incredible growth, how they've both been so brave in facing their problems and getting the help they needed. Her voice gets a little shaky when she says the adults learned important lessons too, about believing children and holding everyone accountable fairly. She raises her glass and says she's grateful we're all here together, that we chose family and honesty over pride and anger. Several relatives lift their glasses too, and I see Uncle James wipe his eyes quickly with his napkin. Aunt Beverly has tears running down her face, and even Rachel looks emotional as she raises her glass toward grandmother. I lift mine too, feeling my throat get tight as I look around at all these people who hurt Tommy, but who also worked so hard to make things right. Tommy tugs on my sleeve during dessert, leaning close to whisper in my ear. He says he's really glad we came to Thanksgiving this year, that it wasn't scary like he thought it might be. Then he asks if we can host Christmas at our house, if all these people can come to our place for the next holiday. The question surprises me because Tommy has always been protective of his space, always worried about people judging him or blaming him for things. But now he wants to invite the whole family into our home, wants to share his toys and his room with cousins who used to watch him suspiciously. I tell him yes immediately, that we can absolutely host Christmas and it'll be wonderful. He grins and goes back to eating his pie, totally relaxed and happy. Planning a family party at our house feels exciting instead of stressful, and I realize how much has changed in both of us over these months. The drive home is quiet with Tommy half asleep in the back seat, full of turkey and pie and happy from playing with his cousins. I keep glancing at him in the rearview mirror, thinking about how far we've come from that horrible Thanksgiving last year. I remember him standing in the corner crying while Aiden smirked and ate his dinner. Remember the sick feeling in my stomach as I watched my son get punished for something he didn't do. I remember the months of planning my revenge, the videos I collected, the wedding cake incident that exposed everything. The path from there to here was messy and painful, full of lawyers and therapy and family members taking sides. I made mistakes I'll always feel guilty about, especially using Aiden the way I did at the wedding. But both boys are doing so much better now, both of them healthier and happier than they were a year ago. Tommy isn't scared at family gatherings anymore, doesn't flinch when someone raises their voice or asks him a question. Aiden has better control over his behavior, takes responsibility when he messes up instead of lying about it. The family learned to actually pay attention to what's happening instead of just believing the loudest voice in the room. I learned that protecting your child sometimes means making choices that aren't perfect, that the right path isn't always the clean one. Healing took work from everyone. Took Rachel admitting she was wrong and me admitting I went too far, and the whole family committing to doing better. Christmas morning arrives with Tommy bouncing around the house at 6 a.m, too excited to sleep. He helps me hang decorations and set up the dining room table, asking every 10 minutes when everyone will start arriving. When the doorbell finally rings, he races to answer it and welcomes his cousins inside with huge hugs. He shows them his room without any hesitation, pulls out his favorite toys to share, laughs when they mess up his carefully organized action figures. Rachel arrives with Aiden around noon, carrying a wrapped present that she hands directly to Tommy. He opens it to find a really nice art set with fancy markers and sketch pads, exactly the kind of thing he's been wanting. Rachel tells him she remembered him mentioning he liked to draw, and I see genuine warmth in her smile when Tommy thanks her. She thanks me for hosting, says the house looks beautiful and she's happy to be here. The smile on her face isn't forced or fake, it's real, and I can see that she's truly moved past the worst of the anger and hurt. Both boys play together briefly, not as friends but politely, and then drift to different areas to play with different cousins. They're civil and careful with each other, which is probably the best we can hope for. The family eats together and laughs together, and nobody brings up last year's drama or the wedding or any of the painful stuff. We talk about normal things like work and school and vacation plans, and it feels good to just be a family again. Both Tommy and Aiden are happy and healthy, surrounded by adults who finally know how to handle problems fairly. We'll never forget what happened. The memories are too painful and too important to just erase. But we've proven that relationships can heal when people commit to doing the hard work, when everyone takes responsibility and chooses forgiveness over grudges.